So, as said, welcome. Marco is my name. I am professor in, I would say, mechanical engineering. Actually, this is the official name at Blekinge Institute of Technology. But I'm working most of the time and in my research with this term product service system, which is abbreviated in the title here as PSS. So what is product service systems? I'm going to show you some definitions, of course, but in this particular workshop, we want to focus more on how this product service systems topic, area, field of research is linked with something which is very, very important nowadays when you talk about sustainability, the future of the planet, and so, which is responsible consumption. So in the book of abstract, you find information about this workshop, and I really want to point out that we didn't write the title. It's probably one of the few typos I saw in the book of abstract in relation to, it's the title of this particular workshop, but it's not a problem. We are going to correct it later on. And I just want to show you, a little bit about the special interest group this workshop is organized by, which is the design of product service systems. And then I want to show you a little bit more about the agenda for today. So let's move forward to talk about PSS in general and this SIG. So we are currently, me, Professor Yong, and the panelists, part of a special interest group, which is called Design of Product Service Systems. If you want to know more, you can refer to the QR codes that you see on screen. So if you want to access our webpage, you can just take your phone and click, and you can basically observe and have a look to all the information related to the activities and the objectives of the SIG. But if you want to have a little bit more, live experience, you can click on the right-hand side QR code, which is the intro video for what we do. And this essentially the idea is to create this network, to create this multidisciplinary environment, to raise the level of understanding of what is product service systems, what are they, and what is PSS design. So we want to capture this idea, how do we design product service systems in a way to benefit companies, customers, and society in general? So we want to involve students and young researchers, of course, in this journey. And this workshop is actually one of the ways we try to involve young investigators together with other mechanisms. Nowadays, we have a PhD course in product service systems, which is ongoing. And it is going to be replicated also next year if you are interested in this topic. So we want to involve you, young investigators, academic audiences, but also industrial audiences, and exchange lessons learned on how to design PSS to reach different goals and how to exchange pedagogical and educational practices. So short about the workshop. As you probably read in the book of abstract, the PSS, they're often celebrated in the sense that people are really celebrating them for the potential to reduce environmental impacts. If you go back to papers from 1999, when PSS was defined, environmental impacts and sustainability was the main reason why companies should have invested in PSS to some extent, because they can diminish resource consumption, raw material extraction, waste generation. So all this type of different concepts is not something that I invented now on the fly. It's something you can find very often in the literature. But if you also look a little bit closer to the literature, these solutions do not always render sustainability gains. There is not that every time you apply this product service system concept to replace a normal product, let's say a normal product, just for simplicity, you obtain the sustainability gains that you were expecting. So some products, and there are many different examples of it, they're shown to last much less than products. Some PSS, the products that are using via PSS have been shown to last much less than the one-sale counterpart. And if you think about specific types of PSS, like take-back systems, they've also been observed to work less well. And not efficiently as expected. So the goal of the workshop today is to investigate the issue of how to intentionally design PSS. So to promote responsible consumption and resource-preserving behaviors among consumers. So we can intentionally design products and services in an integrated fashion to make people to behave and consume responsibly, and to make them to, preserve resources and to be able to contribute in this way to environmental preservation and sustainability in general. So we are going to do quite a few things in order to discuss about the relationship between PSS and responsible consumption. So this is an overview of the agenda that we have in mind for today. So my idea was to spend a few minutes about to do an introduction to the topic. But now, in order to kick off a little bit the activities, I would like you to take your phones, in fact, so to have them in your hands, because I want to have a little bit of a warm-up through a tool that you probably know already quite well, which is this Mentimeter app, which is essentially an online survey tool where we ask you to answer some questions in relation to how much do you consider yourself, for instance, a responsible consumer, and what is the relationship between design and responsible consumption. So we're going to have this activity, and we have several questions that we're going to explore right now. And this is going to take between 10 to 15 minutes. So we have quite a few aspects that I would like to investigate with you. And then I would like to introduce you to the topic of responsible consumption with regards to PSS, with what I would call an intro talk. So I scheduled 30 minutes for it, but probably it's going to be much less because I would like to also accommodate questions from the audience. But there will be more ways to ask questions in relation to this topic. We are going to have, after a short leg stretch, a panel discussion. And the panelists today will be Professor Yong from University of Turku, Professor Tobias Larsson from Blekinge Institute of Technology, and Associate Professor Daniela Pigosso, which is from the Technical University of Denmark. So the panel discussion will be a way to ask the experts in PSS, what do they consider to be the relationship between PSS and PSS design and responsible consumption, as well as what are the strategies to be able to design something that foster active engagement and responsibility in consumers. But that's not the only thing. We would like also to have more interaction later on. After the break, we will have a case study presentation on the topic of shared micromobility. And I would like to work you to work in groups. So to discuss what are different aspects to be considered when we design this type of solutions from the point of view, for instance, of consumer behaviors, user resources, design strategies, and so on. But I will present a little bit more about the group work later after the main break. So now I would like you to take your phones, and we're going to run a little bit of a survey here in Mentimeter. So you see now a code on your screen and a QR code as well. So I would like you to take the camera of your phone and take a picture of this QR code that you find on the right-hand side of the screen. And here I'm going to ask you a few questions. I will start very simply just to test the system, and then I would like you to elaborate a little bit more about the different topics. So please click on the QR code of your phone, enter this code to participate in the warm-up survey, and we will start very, very simply right now to ask you which country are you from? And as you see, some of you have already started to answer this question. So I will also participate to the pool. So I'm from Italy originally. I had my PhD at Polytechnic of Milan, but I'm sitting in Sweden, as you noticed in the beginning. So I submit my answer as well. And we just wait a few seconds so everybody can test the system and get a little bit acquainted with that. And then we move to the next question. So we have participants from Sweden. I see Germany as well. We have from Brazil. We have from Korea. And yeah, just try it out. So I show it again. This is the QR code you can use in order to log in. And then you have to enter this code. And we are going to use the same QR code and the same code for both parts of this session. Okay, so let's show it here now. Back to the main view. So this was just a warm-up of a warm-up. So let's now move to the next question then. So I would like to ask you, how much do you agree to this following statement? So the fact that you consider yourself a responsible consumer. So from the deep of your heart, how much do you consider yourself to be a responsible consumer? So responsible consumption is the topic nowadays, today for the workshop. So I would like to ask you, okay, what do you think? Where are you in this journey? So I see quite a few answers to the question popping in right now. I leave you a few seconds more. I notice now that the code has changed up here for some reason, but I think it's not very important. Everybody seems to have logged in. But if you have problems, just write me in the chat, which I will check as soon as possible. Yeah. So it seems like most of you consider yourself to be a responsible consumer. We have a good average of 4.8 out of 7, if I remember well, for this particular question. But I mean, I also would like to ask you, okay, you consider yourself to be a 4.8 out of 7 as a responsible consumer, but what are the different factors and criteria that you consider to answer this question? So the next question I would like to ask you is, in fact, if you go on, what is responsible consumption for you in a short sentence? And you see probably here a logo. And this is one of the logos of the Sustainable Development Goals, one of the global goals promoted by United Nations. I would like you to answer in a short sentence, why do you think you are a responsible consumer? What makes you to be a 5 out of 7 in this particular case? Is because you consume less? Is because you consume mostly eco products? Okay, is something more? You try to reduce your waste as much as possible. Okay, try to explain in a sentence, why do you think and you are a responsible consumer, and what is responsible consumption for you in particular? So this question will require a few seconds more than the other one, but please try to contribute to the pool. I will try to compile the results, of course, at the end of the workshop. So it's very good if you can write something that is very insightful. So let's try out. I will also write my statement here. I see that questions and answers are popping up. I'm actually reflecting a little bit on my contribution as well. Yeah, just submitting as well, like pretty soon. Yeah, so there are many aspects related to responsible consumption. You see, some people are reflecting of day-to-day life cycle consumption. Some people are talking about recycling. Some people are talking in general about reducing their environmental impact in their everyday life. For some people is avoiding waste. For some people is to prolong the life of a product. And for some people is thinking about my social impact, or to, in general, as I wrote, but I don't see it popping up, to try to choose between alternative options, the one that has the least burden. Is probably going to pop up pretty soon. But, we need probably to think a little bit deeper than how we as designers can do in order to be able to make people to behave responsibly. So what are the strategies when it comes to design? But this is something that we'll address a little bit better, a little bit more of a panel discussion. And here, I would like to continue a little bit more. It seems like I'm trying to squeeze a lot of information out of your brain, but this is just really much to play a little bit with words and concepts to then be able to be a little bit more prepared and active for a panel. So here I also would like you to plot in this spider diagram what do you do in practice to be responsible. So we have been talking about recycling, we have been talking about changing your patterns. But what in practice do you try to do? How much do you agree with the following statements? Are you a person that really try to consume less than your peers, or are you more like a person that is choosing a particular type of a product? Or a person that actually is very, very careful deciding what type of products you want to buy, you need to buy, and you try to develop an attachment only to a few of them. From my end, I don't really believe I'm consuming less than my peers. If I look at my waste bag every evening, it's pretty full. So I think I'm not a person that is consuming less. Maybe I'm trying to be a little bit more careful with eco-efficient products. Do I avoid buying products rather than renting them? And I rather rent them? Not really much. I try to recycle and restore as much as I can. Not really very much. And I develop attachment only to a few products. Probably my wardrobe is not saying that, to be honest. So this framework is not something that I came up with. This is, in fact, an outcome of a research that has been conducted by a paper that I'm going to present in a short while in relation to different actions that can be taken in order to act responsibly. And it's quite interesting to see the results of the graph. There is not just one strategy. There are different strategies that can be combined together. And this view that you see on screen is also not something that is totally complete. There are different ways and different motivational factors as well related to how do we act in order to behave responsibly. But as you see, the results are pointing mostly towards responsibility as an action of consuming less and try to recycle and restore more. And you probably notice that the question related to, or the statement related to, renting products or leasing products and avoiding buying them is the one that got the lowest score. And if you look at it from a product service system perspective, this is quite of interest, because product service systems are a strategy where essentially you try to substitute a pure product with something else, with a combination of products and services. So this is a good food for thought for the PSS engineer, because it doesn't seem to be one of the preferred strategies today by many of you participated to the workshop when it comes to act responsibly. So it's a good input to the general discussion while you observe that. And I think we are getting to the end of this warm-up now. I would like to ask you, why do you think some consumers are acting irresponsibly today? So we said, probably pretty good, and we are probably a good selection of responsible consumers just because we are interested in this workshop. But why do you think people act irresponsibly today? What makes them to act irresponsibly? So are there particular dimensions that are worth to be lifted when you talk about irresponsibility? Or is more like a mindset? What makes us to act irresponsibly? It has always been like that. And we always acted irresponsibly throughout time and place, or what is actually missing in order for us to become responsible. Here you can submit different answers, probably also multiple answers. And I will also try to elaborate a little bit from my point of view. So see, the answers are starting to pop up. And as a general topic and as a general reflection, I see that many of you are talking about convenience when it comes to irresponsibility. Time is value, and you don't have time. The systems today are not designed in order to show the value of acting responsibly. I mean, many times people are acting irresponsibly out of convenience, and because we don't see the necessity of change. So there are quite a few different aspects that are discussed in relation to irresponsibility. And this is something that is worth bringing up later with our panelists. How do we design in order to avoid and to create value so that irresponsible actions are not preferred by people and customers? So these are also very good. It's very good food for thoughts for the later session and also for the group work. And nice that I see answers popping up. As I said, I will populate a slide later on with your answers, and we are also going to publish them at the end of the workshop in a way that everybody can access it. So this is actually the last slide in relation to this particular topic. And now I would like to give you a little bit of an intro talk in relation to responsible consumption and process systems, so we can frame some of the ideas, some of the concepts that we brought up in Mentimeter, and then we can eventually start to warm up our brains in relation to the panel and what we are going to ask to them. So thank you for participating and taking an active role to this warm-up exercise. And I hope this has helped a little bit in getting into the mood of the workshop, also even if you are not co-located today. And this is, in fact, a good hook and a good opportunity for me to start talking shortly. I don't want to give a long keynote speech, but just a very short intro talk to fix some of the concepts that you brought up here in these slides in relation to the idea of designing, and in particular design PSS for responsible consumption. So I've been looking a little bit at the literature, and if you Google product service systems and responsible consumption in Google Scholar, you don't find a lot of papers. I mean, if you Google product service systems and sustainability, you find thousands. I don't know, probably 10,000. If you model product service system and business models, you find tons of contributions. But if you Google these two particular terms, PSS and responsible consumption together, there is not really much popping up. It's not an area of research that has been dedicated a lot of attention if you look at the pure raw data from Google Scholar. Maybe more research is hidden into different keywords, into different taglines. But if you zoom into this particular statement, well, it's not as populated as I thought. And the few papers that I found, they introduce the topic by looking at the good old times. And they actually refer to often to this book that you find here on the as a screenshot on the right-hand side of the slide. So essentially, the starting point to discuss responsible consumption is often the concept of abundance. So in the good old times, as people often write about, when things were not in abundance. Typically, prior to the Industrial Revolution, business and industry would hardly throw away their products and buy products. So in a way, they were more used to responsible consumption than what we are used today, many people claim. So when things are in abundance, people easily accept a wasteful and exploited attitude. And there is quite a lot of interesting material to read in this book, which is called Recycling and Reuse in the Roman Economy. And it really shows how when the resources are not abundant, craftsmanship, individuals, people with skills, they really try very hard in order to reduce and recycle everything that they have in their hands in order to create something new, to create value through a new function, a new product, or any type of a new offer. So recycling and reuse is not something you do typically for ideological motivation, but out of necessity, many people claim, in order to create value. And as many of you pointed out when discussing irresponsibility, the ability to show the creation of value through acting responsibly is a very, very important aspect to be addressed by the design activity. So these good old times, they're often, opposed to the bad, I put a question mark here, of course, modern times. And many people claim that the Industrial Revolution has changed the business's approaches on the use of materials or resources, just because we have things in abundance. And also because essentially we design things with a programmed end of life. So a product is going to reach its end of life at one stage or the other. And it's programmed in a product, in any type of system, but when it's no longer usable or required, they are just going to be discarded as waste. This is more or less the throwaway mindset that was triggered by the Industrial Revolution, many people say. And this throwaway mindset is something that has become widely pervasive in consumption patterns of many society. So in a way, if you look at it from a design perspective, disposable products are intentionally designed with the explicit purpose of being discarded after use. So the picture here on the right-hand side is not a random one. This is quite a funny, not funny story, probably a little bit dramatic story as well, related to Atari, which is a very, very known video game manufacturer of the 80s. Instead of selling these disastrous video games, it was called E.T., the extraterrestrial, to the market, they decided to take all the cartridges and just bury them in the desert instead of even making them available to the market, just because the game was so bad. So this particular example is something that you probably can still see in a documentary in Netflix, where I took the picture from, essentially. And it's a very good example of how modern society has kind of a throwaway mindset when we think about the products they offer. And in particular, I look at manufacturing companies. And an aspect that is often discussed is the ability of trying to cut with this particular pattern and reorienting consumption in a way to become a little bit more responsible. What is very, very important to make people understand is that the choices they make, the decision of consuming or not consuming, it has very radical and long-lasting consequences. So if you buy or not buy a product, it's not just, it doesn't have a consequence for you, but it has also very important consequences from a political, cultural, social, and economic perspective. Probably nowadays, with the war between Russia and Ukraine, we have quite a clear picture of what does it mean to political, cultural, and social consequences. If we decide to buy gas from Russia, and this is going to be used to finance, buying weapons or such, everybody has in their brain right now that, I mean, the choices that we make are going to have these long-lasting impacts. But this is not something that we associate with every decision related to consumption. But this is in fact the case. We buy a particular product with that contains this particular chemical. This chemical is not going to disappear. It's going to appear somewhere else in the environment when we discard it, and is going to not just affect our local community, but also extend to other places in the world. So there's quite a lot of discussion nowadays. How can we make possible to act, to make people to take responsible choices, since these choices, they have long-lasting consequences related to that. So if you look at the literature, it's talking a lot about reorienting consumption patterns and becoming more sustainable and responsible. And there are two questions that are often brought up. How can engineers cope with the issue of irresponsible consumption through the act of design? And how can solutions, and in this case, it's very important to notice it's not just products, but typically products and service combinations can be intentionally designed to foster responsibility. And to answer one of the questions that they brought up before, what is responsible consumption? A good place to start is probably Sustainable Development Goal number 12, which is one of the 17 goals defined by the United Nations. And here you find a list of different aspects, of different targets related to responsible consumption and production. For instance, one of them is related to the sustainable management of use of natural resources, which is quite related to the choices that we make every day as a consumer. We can find targets related to reduction of waste generation. Many of them have brought it up in the survey before. And it's also oriented very much towards, people and companies and organizations buying products. So you find something in relation to procurement practices, and also in relation to promoting universal understanding of sustainable lifestyle. And you also brought up sustainable lifestyle as one of the aspects related to irresponsibility, for instance. But what is responsible consumption from the point of view of the consumer is also quite interesting to be brought up. And there is quite a lot of research, in fact, on the theory of consumption behavior, which is worth mentioning before digging deeper into responsibility. And if one would like to study responsible and consumption together, cannot really avoid looking at different models that explain how do we consume today, our consumer behavior. So our consumer behavior is described by different models. One of the models that is mostly brought up in literature is this one that you see from I cannot pronounce the name of this author, but the model is called Needs, Opportunities, and Abilities, or NOAA, where the consumer behavior is very much related to intention. And intention is linked both to motivations and behavioral control. So motivation and behavioral controls, on the other hand, they are linked to the needs, to the opportunity, and to the ability of the consumer. So needs are related, for instance, to comfort, pleasure, work, health, privacy, money, while opportunity is typically related to the availability of information, prices, the availability of shops. And ability is financial, of course, spatial, cognitive, and physical. So if you want to have a look at what is responsible consumption, I think the first step is then to look at what is consumption and how behavior can be modeled. I think for everybody of you who wants actually to dig into in these particular topics, 3 major keywords for further studies are related to the motivations, these microfactors related to physiological, emotional needs, behavioral control factors that limits the consumer motivations, which is typically financial ones and physical ones, as discussed before, and the opportunities. They are all related, in the other hand, to some macro factors, which are related to which are the ones on the top of the picture here: technology, economy, demography, institutions, and culture. And these are influencing the free items, all influencing the free items that you see on screen. And yet, this model is very generic and doesn't really tell what responsible consumers are doing. We're just trying to model, okay, what are the factors that influence their behavior. There is a paper from 2008 that I think is pretty interesting to think about dimensions of responsible consumption, something that I asked you before during the beginning of the meeting of this workshop. And is a paper which is looking at three things in general. Is trying to gather insights about the way consumption might modify our relationship to the material world, is trying to understand what it means to be sustainable and a responsible consumer, and also is trying to provide insights about the role of design and the potential for contributing to reorienting these consumption patterns. So this paper is published by Marchand and Walker in 2008, but is still very, very actual when it comes to define dimensions of responsible consumption. First of all, the traits of responsible consumers. And here there are different traits that can be extracted. And these are kind of motivations or considerations that make people to become responsible consumers. So these are essentially considerations that move people to become a 7 in the scale that I presented to you before. And these are social environmental factors that are driven by the idea of becoming what the paper calls simplifiers, but also there are some personal or dimensional considerations, which are basically looking at perceived personal benefits that you get by buying products and services. In general, the paper is looking at 4 different types of what they call simplifiers. So simplifiers are people that try to simplify their patterns of consumptions and are moved by 4 different categories of motivators. There are what are called better world simplifiers, which are people who do behave responsibly as a consumer because they are committed for a better world. There are what are called eco-efficient simplifiers, that are people that consume more eco-efficient products, but they do not necessarily consume less. And you can see here the link with a spider plot that I was showing you before. There are simplifiers that are called quality of life simplifiers. These are people adopting what is called a sufficiency approach to consumption. So they just buy what is sufficient to them. And involuntary simplifiers, people that consume less but do not necessarily choose eco-efficient products. Involuntary might be that we consume less just because we don't have the financial resources to do that. And this links back to this NOAA model of consumption that I showed you before. The NOAA model of consumption is very important in relation to these different pictures of these different personas, in a way, that you find in the picture here, because they allow the designer to find leverages and mechanisms where they can, in fact, program the offer in order to become a trigger for responsibility. So the 4 simplifier personas are typically used as a reference in order to talk about responsible consumers. But the paper and the result shows that there are other types of people that are not simplifiers in a way, in this way, but they are people that do behave responsibly just because they find the value of it, because they have personal factors and benefits related to the fact of buying less products compared to more. They are, of course, not serial collectors of products, but they are people that are not simplifiers either. It's just that the best trade-off is found on the very left end of the spectrum, when the left end means being able to buy only just the things that we need and not more. So what are the implications for design in this particular case? So the paper looks at these different personas, the different types of simplifiers, and it tries to is basically talking about the ability and the need to promote this individual benefits perspective in relation to responsible consumption. And they explicitly write that design approaches that revisit the notion of personal fulfillment and should be prioritized. And this, as a corollary, we should not just look at product acquisition as the main means to provide benefit to people, but should adopt a more holistic perspective, in a way adopting, for instance, servitization strategies to support positive changes in making sustainable lifestyles. So the conclusion and the implication for design is that, well, in this way, probably this one sale model where you buy products is not the way to work if we want to promote responsibility. We have to think a little bit broader, and we have to think about offering holistic solutions, which include products and services. The paper also looks at the relationship with objects to get to the same conclusion that PSS are important. So responsible consumers are seen to have a close and simultaneously distant relationship with the world of goods or products. So they are close to some products, a few carefully chosen objects in which they invest quite a lot emotionally, but they maintain a very distant relationship with many other goods. And we are not inclined to impulse buying. So what is eventually the implication for design is that for most of these products, in fact, there is a space for replacing them replacing them with result-focused solutions such as service systems. So while for some products there is probably not much room for changing anything just because of a strong emotional attachment people have with such products, for the majority of the rest, people are probably more inclined to buy services, to rent things, to lease or to pool objects, instead of just buying and having them under their control all the time. So this idea of providing a result-focused solution for the objects that people have an emotion for objects that people do not have an emotional attachment to is suggesting that designer must look to alternative sources of meaning and pleasure, and typically replacing an artifact with products that enable a service, or to dematerialize the products completely, which is very much aligned with what product service systems is trying to do. If you go back to the origins of product service systems, there is already in 2005 a discussion about how to promote responsible consumption through the use of PSS. And the PSS have been often indicated by the literature. I refer to this paper from Mont and Plepsis in 2005. And PSS are mentioned as a way to take action toward the sustainable goal 12, even if the sustainable goal was not published there yet at that time. But functional solutions and product and services, combinations of them, are often seen, they were already seen 17 years ago, as the way to be able to foster sustainable, responsible consumption between consumers. A few slides to wrap up what is happening today at the intersection between responsibility and PSS. So the same paper that I mentioned you before is talking about PSS and the mechanism by which PSS can make people more responsible, and very much this is related to the ability of dematerialized consumption. So the idea of replacing a physical good with something which is instead not physical. And you're very familiar probably with the model that you see here on the right hand side of the picture. There are different types of PSS, and these describe different strategies by which to realize dematerialization, sometimes very extreme and sometimes very marginal. But anyway, there are different ways in order to interpret the PSS and try to foster responsibility in a way. There are different examples by which you can envision PSS as a mechanism in order to create more responsible behaviors. And one of the most pedagogical one I probably found is related to a vacuum cleaner. So if you look at vacuum cleaners, every household, they typically possess one or more. And this is a good proxy, typically, of quality of life. If you own a vacuum cleaner, you are, it means or very often that, the quality of life is somewhat decent. At least this paper that I mentioned here below is basically stating. But what if instead of having millions of vacuum cleaners all around the country, the function of cleaning the floor or cleaning different carpets are is replaced with a service instead of these millions of products? You will have more or less the same or more quality of life, and you will have tons of incredible savings in terms of material inputs and waste generation, just because over many decades, just because you don't have to create so many products that are probably used a couple of times per week. So the PSS has the potential of fostering sustainable and responsible consumption along its entire life cycle, from procurement to design to manufacturing to use, prolonging, for instance, the life of the products to the end of life. And there are different mechanisms, from refurbishment and reuse to recycling to design for environment, and the recycling primary resources that are typically brought up in as an example of how they can contribute to a sustainable society. And there are more mechanisms as well that are discussed in the literature that go beyond the simple process that I showed you before. And it's about the influence and making customers be informed and minimizing the material flows. And there are all aspects that probably are going to investigate a little bit more in the workshop and with the panel. So there are different ways the PSS can cope with irresponsibleness. Probably it's a little bit made up word, but just to make you understand the concept of it. And there are, of course, a few problems that that we are trying to pinpoint and discuss with your panel then. It's not that simple, especially to implement PSS and replace products. There are many psychological individual factors that make difficult to replace products with some more open and shared solutions, and ownerless solutions, in fact. And many people and many consumers are hesitant to accept ownerless solutions and systems, and this is something that was already raised more than 20 years ago when discussing the origins of PSS. And there are many factors related to it, related, for instance, to independence, hygiene, and intimacy. And I also would like to play a little bit with you later about what are the factors that you consider to be one of the major hinders in relation to ownerless consumption. And several studies report also that when you have PSS, when you promote and you implement PSS solutions, you obtain the total opposite effect that you would have obtained, that you expect you would have obtained. If you think about bike sharing systems today, they are very good and very efficient, but the hardware, the products are very often mistreated and vandalized. And this actually means improved consumption of material resources just to replace the hardware with a much higher frequency than for a solution where you essentially own the bike yourself. So there are different aspects related to PSS and consumption that actually play the opposite effect than what you were expecting in the beginning. So there are some food for thoughts that I would like you to bring up after the short leg stretch. So we saw that it's important to change the consumption patterns when you think about sustainable development, because essentially, since the Industrial Revolution, we have this throwaway mindset. And even if we have a little bit of difficulty to understand what responsible consumption means, to define it, and also what are the different strategies to approach responsible consumption in general. What we really understand is that is not just probably a problem of design, but we need a multidisciplinary approach to be able to design intentionally something that foster responsibility. We need contribution from psychology. We need to understand, for instance, this model of consumption that I showed you before that has not much in relation, is not really related to engineering. So we need to have the ability of working with multidisciplines all together. And also, there are a few issues in relation to what is the degree of servitization and dematerialization that is acceptable by consumers, and to what extent we can really substitute products with services. And even if we do that, it's not really given that a product service mix outscores a normal one sale model, and very often we have associated rebound effects when we invest in sustainable solutions and, for instance, spend less time and money in order to perform a function, but we use them somewhere else in a even more unsustainable way. So there are different aspects and keywords to keep in mind for the rest of the workshop. Right now, I will stop here with this intro talk, and I wonder if you have some questions. We can post them in the chat, or you can just raise your voice. If you don't have any, we just take a short leg stretch until 14:20, where we start with the panel discussion. But for now, I just wonder if you have any question here in the session. And I will go back to my open view. Thanks, Ania, for your feedback. So you don't have questions from your side. Okay, I see you don't have many questions at present. So we'll take a leg stretch until 2:20. And here at 2:20, we will start with the panel discussion. By the way, you have the references here are the references what I just shown you to you. And the panel discussion will be started just after the leg stretch, and see you in 10 minutes then. Hi, everybody. So we'll start in 1 or 2 minutes with a panel discussion that you see on screen here. And let you go back to your chairs and to your screens and finish drinking your coffee. But in a couple of minutes, we start again. Okay, we are soon ready. 30 seconds and we kick off. Yeah, I think it's the 30 seconds have passed. Okay, thank you very much for remaining here, and thank you very much for the panel that we have today to discuss how can PSS be intentionally designed for all we have discussed so far. I probably said the word responsible consumption 200 times in 1 hour, but now I will leave the word and the stage to the experts in PSS, in sustainability, in consumer behaviors. And we have here today in these virtual chairs. I made these chairs to be very, very comfortable for you. Probably you noticed it's not just, I mean, these are very good chairs, the ones you see on screen. We have Professor Yong Kim from the University of Turku. Welcome. We have Associate Professor Daniela Pigosso from the Technical University of Denmark, and Professor Tobias Larsson from Blekinge Institute of Technology. So I would like just to go around the table to give you the chance to present yourself a little bit, starting from the left-hand side of this picture. So Professor Kim, can you just briefly tell us about you and your experience?
Okay, thank you, Marco. And I think your introductory remarks are kind of very good, and compiling some information available in a related issue. And I think I would like to just share one page of my PowerPoint actually. So this is my first time doing it, so maybe how do I share it?
Um, I
Can
think I
anyone
think
tell
you should
me?
have access on the bottom of this open interface with the microphone. On the right hand side, there is a small screen. I hope you have a
Okay,
small
hold
screen.
on. Okay, there's a share. Okay, looks like I want to share my PowerPoint. Can I share it only screen? Da,
I
da,
think
da,
you can
da.
only share the
Maybe
screen.
Windows. Okay, now I got it. Okay, so I will share this one. Okay, so does everybody see my PowerPoint?
I see that now. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So, okay. Do you see the screen show?
Yeah. No,
Okay.
we see the PowerPoint main view, but we see the slides anyway.
Oh, you see the whole, not just the screenshot. Then I'll probably
Yeah, I
do
did
it
the
that
same
way.
because of some issues with that. Yeah, but
Okay.
it's
All right. So
work well.
let me- yeah, let me just use this way. So the this is the first time that I use the University of Turku logo in my presentation in the
Yeah.
Design Society activity. Okay. Uh, I like the our color is a purple. So there's some story about the purple people creativity issues. But anyway, so that's not the issue that I want to talk today. Uh, but I'm going to just share uh, some information from one of my papers published in 2019. I published a paper on systematic method to design product services systems using personalization service based on experience evaluation in International Journal of Product Development. And in the paper, I was giving some kind of a experience design guide, and I'm just taking that and then put sustainable experience design guide. So I think it is the kind of the same information. And what I would like to emphasize is we talk about the use life cycle steps, and then probably we want to identify what kind of experience values associated with the use are about sustainability issues. Okay, so the use focus is the first thing, and then particularly in any kinds of this the experience design would need active emotion. I think something that Marco described was some emotional thing. Yes, those are the emotional value is going to be very strongly related, whatever the motivation is related, whatever the control is related. Okay, so the particularly active emotional value, there are the kinds of emotional value, reactive, but here the active emotional value. And also, I think the overall, as I was hearing Marco's presentation, and then we all know these good things, okay, as a kind of a good citizen, okay, good students or good human being, we want to be a responsible consumer, okay, but we somehow forget to do it, okay, somehow that some other things get the higher priority, and we actually do not be those are the nice citizens. So information is going can play a lot of important role in this case. Okay, I'll come back to this, but this and the when we are drafting this the call for the workshop proposal, I emphasize the active engagement. I think this is very important. Okay, by having engagement, by giving the initiation to the users, and it is likely that they can change their whatever it is a consumption behavior or it is something related to the health, uh, their behavioral change can be supported by engagement and giving the initiation to them. And what is kind of a related is to give an intrinsic motivation. In the self-determination theory, and three things are required to give a to kind of arouse intrinsic motivations. one is a competency. And this is something that it could be that you are good or bad can be identifiable. Okay. And you can also provide some self-control, autonomy. At the same time, you can compare with other people. Okay, so that I'm good, I'm better than for example, my uh, friends, or I'm good, better than 1 month ago myself. Some of those are relatedness issue is important. And when this competency, autonomy, and relatedness is come together, and actually the gamification uses these three, the cognitive, uh, the preferences. Okay, so here it is also it applies here. And then when we talk about this, the consumption behavior, or any kinds of experience. And a lot of people who have worked on experience, they talk about that experience is evolutionary. Okay. In other words, whatever values elucidated by the certain experiences, the positive value should be improved over time based on accumulation of your previous experiences. Okay, sometimes based on accumulation of previous experiences of other people, your peers. Okay, so this the fact that these engagement issue, intrinsic motivation, and this evolutionary effect, and combining this, actually in the paper that I was presenting in International Journal of Product Development, was to provide a personalized service or personalized experience. I use these three activities in an iterative way. First, the consumers would experience whatever it is, and then let them evaluate in a very timely, in a concise way, their own evaluation, real time. Okay, their own experience. Let them evaluate their own experience, real time. And then based on this evaluation information, in other words, customer experience data, okay, which is given by the consumer themselves, it is a zero party data. And by providing that information to the user, to the consumer, so that they can actually, their engagement activity with other people's or engagement activity for self-reflection is supported. In other words, by providing information, okay, and then having that information, in other words, accumulation of our previous experiences, and then they are going to engage, share with other people, or talk to himself, then it is going to improve next iteration of experience. So it is going to be experience, evaluate, engage, experience, evaluate, engage. So that is going to be something needed.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you. It's a good and insightful introduction, Professor Kim. I now move to Daniela Pigosso. Thank you for joining. We were solving some issues in the chat while speaking. Can you just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your resource specialty?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the invitation for joining the panel today. So I'm Daniela Pigosso, Associate Professor here at DTU, and I started as an environmental engineer because I wanted to make a difference to the world in terms of sustainability. But then very soon I realized that what I was doing in my education was basically to treat pollution after it was there. And I thought I would like to do something to prevent the pollution from happening. That's when I started work with eco-design. So trying to integrate sustainability issues into the way we design our products. And then very soon I realized that actually, if we want to achieve a higher impact, we need to go from developing these specific products to developing the systems around it with a product service systems point of view. And I've been researching on it for a quite long time as well, and more recently using circular economy as the main paradigm, which helped me again to expand the boundary of analysis to not only product or product service system design, but also to business models, value chain design, and so on and so forth. And more recently, I realized that all of those initiatives, they are great, and we should continue doing them, but they are prone to rebound effects. And that's the new area that I'm getting into just now. So I've started a couple of years ago, and I've just got a big project. So the focus in this area will enhance quite a lot in the next years to come.
Thanks, Daniela. I actually added the last reflection on rebound effect because I know you are starting to work on this particular topic. Yeah, good. I will have some questions for you later on in the panel, but I move to our third panelist, Tobias Larsson. Hi, Tobias. So you are sitting 5 meters from where I'm sitting now, on the other side of the door. Still, welcome.
It's almost 10 meters. Okay, thank you for having me here. So my background is also from mechanical engineering, and I kind of moved a little bit away from that when we started realizing that the discussion on what was the best product was not really a focus on the product itself anymore, but more a focus on how it kind of satisfy an entire ecosystem. And as we are moving into a situation around scarcity and having the sustainable development goals, these global goals, it's not a product view anymore. It's more of a system view. So basically in my research, I try to kind of align this global agenda with also, of course, the view of the manufacturers who are putting the things out there, either through mass production or through kind of low volume, high value production, and trying to have them change into being more sustainable in their view of what they're putting out there. And I think the specific perspective we are using, or I'm using, is a lot of modeling and simulation, of course. So it's becoming a lot of decision support from my research.
Thank you very much. Now I would like you following online to post questions in the chat while we are speaking. I have, of course, some leading questions for the panelists. I didn't come unprepared, and actually have some tricky questions too, I believe. And I can tell you, all the three of you, I would like to have one example where you clearly see a PSS fostering responsible consumption before the end of this session. But I will not start from that. I start from another question that I really would like to share with you, which is based on the title of this workshop. So, this workshop is talking about intentionally designing PSS. But I would like to go around the table in the same order. And very shortly, what is intentional design according to you? Because, it seems to be a little bit, overkilling. Isn't design always the outcome of an intention? Does it really have a meaning of intentional design to say and talk about intentional design? And what are the mechanisms to intentionally address the issue of responsible consumption in PSS? Not the easiest place to start, I know, but I would like to get your opinion on why did we feel the need of talking about intentionally designing the PSS. Professor Kim, how do you interpret intentional design in your world?
Okay, so basically, in contrast by having PSS, okay, a lot of early work on PSS addresses the ecological value issues and rental services, things like that. And then just expecting that somehow these services would help the users be a responsible consumer, but specifically addressing their behavioral habit itself. Okay, I think this is those intentional design is kind of a meaning. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, we know in these days everybody knows that we need to be a good citizen, but somehow they don't do it. Okay, so how we can change their behavior? So that is I think I would take that's intentional design is meaning in this context.
Thank you. That's a good explanation. So I follow up to Daniela. So do you want to add something from your specific point of view on this intentional design thing?
Yeah, I would agree that what we do today is intentional design. And I would also say that it is not enough. So with intentional design, we have a problem or we have a need that we want to focus, and we try to find a solution or to design a solution that can address this need. That's fair enough. Many times we manage to address the need. But what we fail to consider is actually the unintended consequences that are emerging because of the introduction of this new solution. And the new solution can be a new product or it can be a product service system. So what I think we need to do in design is actually to expand the boundaries from only looking to the intentional solutions that you want to achieve to also understanding what are the potential unintended consequences of those solutions. And right there in the early phases of design, try to understand how to prevent them from happening. When we get there, then we are going to be able to have solutions that can totally fulfill their aims at the same time as not creating the additional problems that will require new solutions, that will create more problems, and so on and so forth.
Thank you very much. And Tobias, I know
Yeah,
you
I'm
have
going to
talked
add a
a lot
little bit
about
to what
yeah,
Daniela was saying there. I think we are coming from a kind of history where I think it was all about having the ability to design something that the user could get, and moving then into more of, let's call it a kind of a user perspective, to putting the kind of user of a certain artifact in perspective and looking at the affordances there, and that's really good. But the kind of unintended effect of that, I think, is that we kind of scrap the society needs. And I think that's what we're looking at. What I think all designs are intentional, but when we talk about intentional PSS design, I think it's about not just looking at the one consuming a service or a product, but also the kind of secondary effects of that. And that's typically where a society is suffering. So I think it has always been an intent, but the intent was creating that something for a certain aspect. And now I think we have to broaden that intent. And the only way to do that is, of course, to see that this intention is taking care of all the unwanted, undesired effects also, and actually making an intentional design to take away those as at the same time as you satisfy a certain need. But of course, this has not been in the focus of any kind of manufacturer because it's basically not their view. But this is where we're moving towards. So I think the mechanism to intentionally address this is actually to realize that you always have a larger ecosystem around any kind of product you put out there in society.
Thanks. This is quite enlightening, especially when I think about the fact that design is always intentional in a way, but maybe there are different degrees of intentions in a way, especially when I think about PSS. So I have another question, in fact. As I anticipated before, I mean, I've been working with different companies in different cases, and you've seen quite a lot of things happening in your research world. And I was wondering if you can point us to one clear example when a PSS solution is observed to foster responsible consumption. When in fact you have all these type of effects, you reduce waste, you use products that are more eco-friendly. There is something from your experience that clearly points to this example, or is more like diffused. So it's fostering some responsibility in some areas, but not much in other areas. Professor Kim, do you see any clear examples of PSS as solutions to this problem of responsible consumption? I think you are on mute right now.
Okay. Okay, I would like to this responsibility to talk about some PSS case we did about 12 years ago or 13 years ago. Okay, it started as a kind of some internal project. Okay, but it was about as you all know, about the clothes. Okay, and we use
Do you
a
want to
lot of
share something?
clothes. I'm sorry.
Do you want to share something?
No, I can just I didn't prepare any material for that, and this was about the recycle of clothes, and in Korea 13 years ago, you could find in the back alley over your around your home, you can find those recycling bins, and actually it looks exactly the same currently. Okay, I have not found much of those in the Turku here because my experience here is very limited. Okay, uh, but in Korea for 13 years, that clothes recycle situation has not changed a lot. But the before recycling, the notion about those the clothes and reusable clothes can be very differently guided. Okay, so we have designed the kind of a recycling system rather than throwing away. A lot of people kind of behave like if you don't need it anymore, you just throw away something. But let's kind of regard that you are giving it as a present to someone that you know. Okay, so a lot of packing and cleaning was encouraged to be done by the users themselves, and using some convenience store as a physical touch point. And we started this 13 years ago as a more like imaginative project. Okay, we didn't realize that it could be. We didn't expect it can be realized. But I think these days a lot of companies' interest on those uh, the experience, ecological value is increased, and also social responsibility is increased. I think this is going to be soon realizable. So I think that is the case uh, before thinking about, rather than this clothes is going to be just thrown away because you don't need it, but think about the clothes as this should be reused, if not you, by other people. Okay, so I think this is a example.
Thank you very much. So I move to our next panelist, Daniela. Can you see from all your research in PSS? I mean, one very clear example that okay, PSS they really work. What should I use for marketing this workshop? Just a good example, a good picture of something to put here or to market it for next time.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because the PSS as a field emerged in the sustainability area, and it was seen as a potential new way of designing systems to lead to an increased environmental performance and hopefully also sustainability performance. So I'd say that there are loads of examples of PSS that are actually trying to do it, especially if you look into the user-oriented product service systems and the sharing systems. They often try to take products that you either have a very short use time or a low utilization and allow more people to have access to the same physical product to prevent having to produce products to fulfill the needs of all of those people. If you look into a very nice example here in Denmark and keeping in the clothing topic, we had Viga. Viga is a babe clothing sharing system which provides packages of babe clothing and equipment depending on how old your baby is. So every 2 or 3 months, as your baby grows, you just change the package to a new one with a bigger size, and the one that you just used will be provided to other family. By doing that, they managed to extend the use of their products by a very high percentage. And at the same time, they fulfill the needs of the family, so they don't really need to worry about what to buy next, because there will be coming the new kit for them. But having said that, I would say that every good example of a product service system could still be better. So in this case specifically, the families receiving the kits, they didn't trust that the cloth was cleaned as they should be to their babies. So they were basically washing it again once they received, leading to an impact that wasn't really necessary. Everything was cleaned before arriving to their house. But it's again the unconscious behavior that we have that can trigger some unintended consequences.
I think it's a very good example, given my experience with babies nowadays, where I have thousands of clothes that has been used probably once or twice. It's incredible, and luckily I have a lot of nephews now. I can dispatch them. That's probably the only good thing about it. Thank you, Daniela. I think that is a very good example and a very, very clear. I actually went to a presentation of this company when I was at probably it was maybe it was SERP Design, SERP PSS, the IPS Square conference a few years back. And Tobias, can you point us to one example also from your experience?
I would actually say no, there is no one example, because in general, I think if you take a good example, which is today good, in 2 days I can break it down and say in how many ways is bad. I think this is the problem, that every step you take forward, you can always find negative aspects of it. And I think this is one of the challenges we have in this field, is that you will always find kind of ways to improve things. But anyway, if you are holding a gun against my head, I would actually say one thing that actually strikes me is the Swedish hamburger chain, Max Hamburgers. I mean, they take something which is really challenging when you have a fast food restaurant with meat, and meat has a very high CO2 negative, and they try to transform that while being very conscious about consumption and attacking a highly tough part and looking at circularity in a large way. So I would actually lift them up as not being successful in all the way, but actually being partly on that way. It's kind of interesting to watch how they look at circularity and in a field which is highly unsustainable otherwise. And I think this is kind of speaking for this field. I think I can lift 100 examples where they are partially doing good, but in general do not reach all the way. And this is why we talk about this intentional design, because all the fields coming from one way or coming from being unsustainable, they're making small progress, but they're not making giant leaps. And I think another Swedish example, which is becoming highly interesting right now, is where we're moving away from fossil in making steel. This is something which is taking up a huge amount in the Swedish energy bill, being able to produce steel without a kind of fossil impact. So carbon neutral steel is going to be really interesting. And this is being prototyped and being deployed as we speak. So there are some quite interesting, let's say, projects going on here. And so Max, which is kind of consumer related, and maybe the fossil free steel, which is more on business to business, but has an effect on our everyday usage of energy, is 2 examples. And then leaving you also with this fact that no matter how good anything is, you can always find negative aspects. You're muted, Marco.
Yeah, because I'm checking and clicking and thing here and there, so it's better I'm on mute all the time. Because I also had a follow-up question of what are examples of irresponsible consumption triggered by PSS, but I let it to be discussed in the workshop later on. I have, in fact, something else I would like to discuss with you. I'm still waiting if you have questions from the chat to post them, so we can, in fact, discuss them also from the point of view of the audience, and not just from these leading questions that I'm bringing up right now. So I have one more to go around and discuss with you, and I share my screen in a second. And in my mind, in fact, when I look like PSS literature, we're talking a lot about ownerless consumption. So if you look at Rolls-Royce functional provision and power by the hour, it's this keyword ownerless consumption is basically popping up all the time. So when you look at consumer products, there is a lot of expectations in relation to ownerless consumption and sustainability. But in my mind, it doesn't seem to sound well with responsible consumption. Because if you own something, you maybe take care more about it. And if you do not own something, you tend not to care that much. So what is your standpoint about ownerless consumption and responsible consumption and their relationship? I can make you an example. We have here a bike sharing system in Karlskrona, and you rent a bike, and it's basically going from point A to point B, and you leave it to another person later on. So you don't own the bike. But if you look at the state of that bikes, I mean, after a few weeks, they are basically destroyed, and people are not actually acting very responsibly when they use them. So what is from your point of view, the relationship between ownerless consumption and responsible consumption? How can we make people responsible when they do not own things? Professor Kim, do you have any idea, any thoughts about this relationship, which is pretty tricky to define?
Okay, so I think if you own it, you care much. If you don't own it, share with other people, you are caring less. Okay, this is the kind of assumption. But I think this can be this situation can be fixed, okay, by having as I mentioned earlier, those the mechanism for experience, evaluate, and engage to become easy and also support the information better. And then we can kind of reduce this careless consumption if it is not yours. I think my general assumption is none of our users are those abusive users. Okay? And our understanding about this ecological issue, sustainability issue is growing by the entire body of our citizenship. Okay? But sometimes we don't have time. Sometimes we don't have the proper way of reflecting our behaviors. But by providing those opportunities, and we can increase kind of allowing them not to be a bad citizen for just some excuse. I think this is something we can fix.
Thank you. I think it's a good reflection, this one, on the fact that you own less and you care less, and vice versa. But in order to break this vicious loop, you have to foster some type of engagement. I totally agree. Daniela, what is your standpoint about this very provocative statement of mine?
Actually, there's a really interesting paper that touched upon that in 2016. I can share the reference, but it's called "The Influence of Ownership on the Sustainable Use of Product Service Systems." And that was a literature review made for the Procedia SERP conferences.
Mhm.
And it really discusses what dimensions of ownership are important to be taken into account when designing a product service system. And they look into psychological ownership. That's about product attachment and how much the user feel that they are connected to the product that they are consuming. It's also about the user participation. So how much the user is able to affect the use of the product during the use phase. There's a time perspective into that as well in relation to when, how often, and for how long the product is being used by the user as a way of creating attachment. Then there's also a dimension on anonymity. If there's anonymity between users or between the user and the provider. And finally, the responsibility across the life cycle. And across those 5 different dimensions, they try to explore how we could design product service systems that are able to deal with changes of mindset because you don't have the ownership of the product anymore. And then connected to that, I would also point to the work from Elinor Ostrom. She won the Nobel Prize many years ago, but basically what she was researching was how to define some design principles for common pool resources. She was talking about rivers, lakes, forests, and so forth. But many of the design principles that she proposed in her research, I believe, can also be used when we are designing product service systems. Because what happens here is that if nobody has the ownership anymore, then it's a shared ownership. And it's important to understand how to behave in those circumstances.
That is a very good answer, Daniela. I would love if you can post the reference in the chat, but I don't know if you can do copy and paste, because I tried with my reference list and it doesn't really work to do copy and paste from my end. But that was a really good tips to check these papers and also to this more general research. Tobias, what do you think about this? You probably saw the state of our bikes in town and, these electrical scooters.
I will pick up with the Elinor Ostrom reference, because that's actually one that stuck in my mind too, because there were some studies like on designing small parks, leisure areas. I don't remember if it was I think it was in California, San Francisco. And they just realized that when the people around the parks were not involved, they simply didn't care because it wasn't their park, it was someone else's park, right? So you basically got littering and destroying of playing areas, etc. But when the community around the park got involved, of course, they cared more. So they didn't own it, but they cared about the solution. And I think this is what we see also in this, what I call first generation of product services like biking systems, etc., that you simply do not care. And I think what we're seeing happening now with these electric scooters and others is that they're starting to hit you on your wallet. I mean, you're not just paying for a service. You make sure that you return the service, basically the bike, in good shapes. Otherwise, if you don't take a picture showing that you return it in good shape, you'll get a penalty. So they're trying to hurt you by the wallet, of course. And this is coming from the fact that the question you're posing is interesting, that it's really hard if you have no stake in a solution to care about its development. Hence, I think to solve that problem is really important to make sure that anybody who is about to be part of a PSS system has a stake in it. It could be financially, it could be any other value, what that we're talking about. And if you find yourself having a stake in such a system, we would actually break that kind of what I call negative chain of no ownership, basically means trashing things. So I actually think it's very seldom that we come across Nobel Prize winners seeing that they have a relationship with our life, but actually Elinor Ostrom financial research makes good sense, I think, for PSS.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a good compliment to what Daniela posted in the chat, to be honest. And I have a last question for all of you from my end. Still waiting. If you have more in the chat, please please add here. I want to show something that it was a bit curious for me when I Googled stuff in Google Scholar. And I just show it now. Sorry, it's in Italian because of my settings. And when I look at Google Scholar, I was searching for the string design for responsible consumption, and I got 0 hits. Not a single paper or anything. I think it's something that has to do with the algorithm, because it must be wrong. It must be somebody working with this string or publishing. But I mean, given that I found this very strange behavior, I was wondering if design for responsible consumption is even a thing. And what other research areas and keywords do you see covering the same topic? Because it was so strange just to find that it has 0 hits as a total. So if I would be a young investigator who wanted to search this field and know more, I mean, where should I start? What should I look at? What are the keywords and the topics that get closer to this idea of design for responsible consumption? Professor Kim, I address you first, even just because you presented your paper before, that had to do, in fact, it was dealing with this topic, and I didn't find it through this particular search string. What is your interpretation of this very, very strange behavior of Google Scholar?
Okay, so actually the paper that I was taking that guide didn't have any word about the responsible consumption. It was customer experience personalization. How we can make personalized experience services. Okay, but I was just using the same guide for intentional design for responsible consumption. Okay, I think this is the, as I mentioned earlier, that we do not have a bad evil. Okay, but the issue is how you can actually make sure that you change your behavior. In other words, how we can have this sustainability over your responsible consumption intent. Okay, so the solution for that is exactly the same as if you want to have your improve the personalized experience. In other words, it has to be personalized. The design, the solution to help those responsible consumption needs to be personalized. Okay, then probably this notion is kind of against the ownerless issues, and your usage behavior is personalized enough so that you would not feel this product is ownerless. So every product, every every bike I'm using, it is all different kind of a bike, but my bike use is personalized. Okay, so I can keep track of my own usage behavior and gives enough opportunity to reflect and even share that with your peers. It confirms, it strengthens your good desire to be a responsible consumer. Okay,
Yeah.
So here, those kind of digital tools, customer experience data, together with a lot of sensor data, can play a very important role to help our good citizens to be responsible consumers.
Thank you very much. So, Daniela, I ask you, okay, what did I do wrong? What are the areas that are overlapping, and where are people discussing these topics most of the time?
Yeah, I think that responsible consumption is probably something that came because of the SDGs. So this is one of them, responsible consumption and production. But I would actually try to search for design for sustainable behavior. I just did a very quick search here on Google Scholar as well. and it came up with 1,500 hits if you use both behavior in American and then behavior in British English. And most of those papers are probably coming from the sustainable design literature, and they are mostly focused on products. But then what I also did was to combine that with PSS very quickly in the search string, and it came with 328 papers.
Yeah.
So I think that this would be a good place to start. There's lots of literature in there trying to understand how to provide incentives to more sustainable behavior from customers. But still, I would say that it has this limited view of only looking at the intended consequences and at the customer, but not yet expanding the system to look at the ecosystem, as Tobias mentioned, but also at the unintended consequences. So I would say for the young researchers, there's for sure something that we can base our research on, and it provides a good foundation for this necessary expansion towards unintended consequences at a broader system level.
Yeah, I think it was a great, in fact, answer to that. I mean, sustainable behavior is much more common. The fact that I was asking you, because if this is in Italian, if I search for the entire web, I get many results on this design for responsible consumption, but not in Scholar. So I don't know if the academic community is hooked up with this sustainable development goal that much, or what's the reason why. This was just a curiosity for me, just to trigger some discussion on what is next. So I will ask Tobias, what is next? What would you suggest to young investigators to do if you want to explore these aspects? It boils down to, I don't know, modeling consumer behaviors, being able to do more creative activities to design responsible solutions. What do you think the answer lies for young investigators?
I think that's there are so many answers to that, but I'll actually start a little bit with this kind of search string, because it's highly interesting, because I think what we're talking about is mixing politics with science and what is needed in general. And I think if you're looking at this from a researcher point of view, and the view that we are educating researchers, we're ending up with kind of referencing islands. You used to, and for example, the Sustainable Development Goals is kind of a new invention. And people talked about this in different terms before. For example, everything has been labeled eco before, and you saw that on products. So we had eco design, everything was eco. And that's something where young researchers might start out, and then they might continue to use eco, although we use different words now. And then it has kind of accelerated. And today we talk about circularity, meaning so many different things. We talk about sustainability, meaning a lot of different things. So there's a confusion there. And this is not just in this field, it's in every field. I mean, we talk about digitalization, which is everything, right? And it could be computer-aided things. Everything was labeled computer-aided 15 years ago, but today it's digitalization. So I think this is the same problem. But to answer your question on where we are going, I think it's a little bit on understanding what we want to achieve. If we want research to help, to clarify so that we know things, or help change, then it is purpose-driven. Then I think it's understanding the missions we want. And this is what I see as positive with the kind of sustainable development goals, because you can say that, okay, we got skills to work with SDG 9, 10, 11, 12. Then we can actually do research and put a mission out there together with industries to support and transform society. So it's kind of applied research for doing good, while research in general, if I'm being a little bit negative, was to just know how things were, to kind of explain things. So where young researchers are going in our field, I would have to say it's a little bit on being purpose-driven and understanding or developing the missions we want to tackle. If we, with research, want to tackle the problems of unsustainable society, we can actually divide this research into certain fields where we can make an impact. It could be in production, making that more responsible. It can also actually be on the consumer behavior, making that more responsible. But the science to support that can be found in so many different fields.
Thank you, Tobias. It was a very good picture of, I think, what we should do next to some extent. So this is please.
I would like to add one comment about this
sure.
literature review issue, or the Googling some certain topics and then expect some of those previous research will pop up, and then by reading it and by comparing it, and that might guide your research, especially for young researchers. I would rather suggest you to read more fun foundational stuff. For example, the reflection is critical in learning. Okay, if you want to kind of change your behavior, if you want to have your users to be more responsible consumers, probably giving them opportunity for reflection is helping them to learn themselves. In other words, change themselves. So overemphasis on literature review by just inserting certain keyword. Rather than that, I would like to recommend rather young researchers try to read things which is foundational. So that's my one comment.
No, I think it's a very good comment, and I don't want to teach students just to Google this keyword and then build your literature review and get your PhD. But it's a little more provocative, let's say, than that. It is a good comment, in fact, for every of you listening. It's not as simple as that. But thank you very much. I just your last choice and last option to post something that you're really curious about in the chat. I don't see much activity, but I still wait for a few seconds. I just want to show you that we are actually at the end of the panel discussion now, a few minutes late. And since I don't see much happening in the chat, I just want to thank the panelists for your answers. I will try to capture them and summarize them, but the recording will be available for the full discussion, of course. And well, for now, what we do, we take a break until 3:30. And yeah, let's do 3:30. And we will start with a little bit more of group work. If you have the opportunity to remain, we will work with Mural on a case related to shared micromobility. Thank you very much, Professor Kim, Larsson, and Daniela. And hope to see you later after the break. Otherwise, to see you around at design conference in some way or another.
Thank you, Marco.
Thank you. So take a break now and hear you later. So everybody, we are soon going to start again, and we do a little bit of warm-up exercise before we kick off with group work. So couple of minutes, and then we start with the session again. So you have time to come back to your chairs. I will divide you very likely in 2 different breakout rooms later on when we do the group work. By the way, while we are waiting for restart, in the references for this introduction talk are ones that you see on screen. So if you want, you can take a screenshot now. Otherwise, I will post them one by one into the chat. I see that there is a limit of the number of, characters that you can have inside the chat when you post things. So these are the references for what we talked about before. And I have to say, I took most of the material from this paper here. And I also have been looking quite a lot at this one, which will be, by the way, the item of the first warm-up exercise that we're going to do in a couple of minutes from now. And here are all the other ones that some of you probably know pretty well in relation to PSS and responsible consumption. So I think everybody should be back by now. So what I would like to do is, in fact, to do a little bit of warm-up before we enter into more active mode. So active mode will be in form of a group work that we'll do with a particular interface, which is the one provided by Neural. I will show you the link and how to access this virtual whiteboard in a few minutes. But before we do that, I would like to come back to the Mentimeter survey, which is the one that I showed you before. It should work with the same code as before, in fact. And simply, you take a picture with your phone, like that, and it should behave, it should get into a presentation of different questions. And you go to the current slide, and you will see essentially different types of statements and set questions that I'm going to ask you. I will bring this up to screen. Now you can click, for instance, on the heart, just to show me you're present. I'm clicking on the heart as well. And these are all follow-up questions from the discussion and the panel that we showed you before. So I hope you are ready for a warm-up, and I will move to this view. So I would like to ask you a little bit about, in general, how to foster responsible consumption, and on the other hand, a little bit more in particular, how to do it through PSS. But let's start a little bit general now. I would like to ask you, would you think has the greatest power or opportunity to reorient current consumption patterns? And here I would like you to rank these different entities or stakeholders from 1 to 5. One of the reasons is why in the literature that I presented to you in the intro speech, but there is in fact quite a lot of discussion about who has the power to reorient consumption patterns. It's not just companies, it's not just manufacturers, but there are other partners as well. And would like to get your point of view. Okay, which one do you think are more powerful and have the most of the opportunity to make you behave responsibly? Is it just a matter of design, or is it more? Many of you mentioned information, for instance. So I ask you to rank things from the first to the last one. which ones do you think have the most influence and which one has the least influence. So we can, in fact, have a baseline for conversation later on in the groups. I also will do my exercise, my choice in the exercise, and let's submit it pretty soon. Okay. Well, I'm kind of confirming your opinion as well. So I got 4 answers for now. So I gave you a few more seconds to submit your own answer to this.
I have a question, Marco.
Yeah, please.
How do you define those? What was it? Front staging.
The front staging customer.
Front staging service provider.
Essentially, if you think about,
is that a retailer or a manufacturer? I mean, those front staging for PSS would be different from just the front staging for Coca-Cola.
Well, let's say that the retailers and the front staging could be, for instance, the supermarkets and the way they position the products inside the supermarket to make you choose one product compared to another. There are different techniques in order to do that. If you think about the world of big yellow machines, for instance, we had a discussion with one of our partners, and they basically said, yeah, we are designing these machines with sustainability in mind, responsibility in mind, but we are not the ones talking with the customers. The ones selling the machines are the retailers. And we have like 50 different retailers, for instance, in the US. And it's them essentially influencing and impacting the customers the most, because they are them using the right words, the right expressions, the right arguments to make the customers to choose and to make the final decision on what to buy. So front staging comes a little bit from all the literature on for instance, the service blueprint. When you have a service blueprint or you are sketching your PSS, you have a lot of these front staging actors, the people that are on the front stage and that are visible to the customer, and some that are on the backstage. Which is basically the ones that you don't see as a customer, but are developing the offer, everything that is offered to you. So front stage and backstage comes a little bit from the service blueprint and that kind of discussion. Just to make a distinction between.
So your question is the front staging versus backstaging, not retailer versus manufacturer.
Yeah, it's just to make an exemplification, but front staging is better than retailers for sure. There are more front staging actors than retailers. But I see that essentially governments and institutions are the ones getting a lot of attention. In fact, when you see your survey and your answers, we got 6 of them here. And this is not totally unexpected, if you ask me, because this is something that in the literature was pointed out very early on. And in fact, when you think about reorienting consumption patterns, you have government and institutions and manufacturers being discussed together. Before I showed you very quickly a little bit from the work from Oksana Mont and colleagues about what can we do, what they thought could have been done in order to change and reorient patterns, dealing with mostly with manufacturers. But they pointed out pretty early also something more in relation to what governments can do. Unfortunately, this one is very small on screen. As you also noticed, governments have a very strong impact on reorienting patterns. And Mont and colleagues, they suggested different means by which governments can promote responsible consumptions. So here you see them from 1 to 6 in a random order. I would like to ask you, please have a look at these means that have been suggested in literature. Which one do you think are the ones that best promote responsible consumption from your own point of view? That would be quite nice to, document later. So here there are 6 different mechanisms that are discussed by Mont and colleagues. which ones do you think in 2022 are the ones that works best and the ones that work maybe not that good and should be down prioritized? So let's do this exercise as well. So I will submit my choice in a second. Okay, so things are starting mixing up. And we got 4 answers for now, and there is not yet clear winner, so you can influence this survey still. And there is some hints that taking leadership and investing in education is probably a good thing, but there are other aspects that are popping up as well. Okay, so we got a total of 6 answers, like the question before, and it seems like the idea of taking leadership and also considering introducing user pay principles, like the polluter pays, they are kind of seen as the most promising and effective ways in order to be able to promote things, promote responsible consumption. So now you get 7 answers, and things are mixing up a little bit, but still taking leadership is seen as one of the most important practices. This is quite interesting because Monte and colleagues, they don't actually make any ranking. They propose them being essentially equal. So it's interesting to see after many years of our experience have shaped the rankings in a way. Well, let's follow up. I have 2 more questions for you to discuss. So let's see if I can move on. So this one I know is not very easy to answer by any means, but since you are here, I believe you are very familiar with PSS. You are kind of familiar with different types of PSS, and this is more like an attempt from me to try to create a kind of a priority list of what PSS types are the best option in a way to foster responsible consumption. I mean, it's more like more than a question. This is, let's say, a reflection statement. I don't know how to explain that. I know that it's very, very difficult to say that something is black and white. But if you have a feeling that some PSS types are expected to work better than others to, push responsible consumption, please indicate it with a preference. I mean, you can say that PSS type is good, and you can agree to a statement, or you can disagree with it, even if you have probably not full, complete knowledge of all the different types. But I wish, since you are here, that more or less you understand the differences between the types, and you can make a statement. But if you cannot, you can basically say, well, I don't know, I give all of them 3 or 5 or 1, because for me they are all equal. I will also try to play this game. I haven't tried myself with this one. And, based on your experience, try to elaborate a little bit what you think can work well. Of course, this is very ambiguous as a question, because there are different mechanisms inside every type. So essentially, this is something that I would like to discuss with you later when we enter into the group work. So we got 5 answers by now, and of course, welcoming for more. And there is quite some agreement that if we push PSS more into the dematerialization schemes, outsourcing, and functional results, we are probably going to get better results. But now with the last few answers coming in, it seems that the ground is a little bit leveled up, with the exception of product leads, which is the one that is least favored by all of you. Functional results being the one that is marginally better. Thank you, very good input. In fact, there is not much in the literature telling, how different PSS types contribute to responsible consumption. It might be something to discuss later on. Let's run the last one. So I was talking to you before about bike sharing, and the picture that you see on screen is a bike from the bike sharing system we have in Paris. So this is the state of one of these bikes we are using in Paris, and this was used as an example for explaining why ownerless solutions are very often not the best for triggering responsible behaviors if people are not engaged. But the question here is more like creating this cloud of different words, and I would like you to just use one word to express why are consumers hesitant in front of dematerialized and ownerless solutions, and especially why people they often prefer to buy products and in general not accessing renting or leasing or pooling agreements instead. The fact that the hardware is worn down, for instance, as in the picture here, might be one of these, and there may be many other options. And I would like you to answer with maximum 5 entries, so we can create a nice tag cloud that we can review later. So let's see. I also answering on the fly. So I think Menti has decided by itself that it should be only 3, maximum 3 keywords, but that's fine. So a few keywords are popping up being stronger than others, and this is quite interesting. Availability, access, and convenience, especially if you look at the bike sharing, availability is and access are very important. But there are other aspects that are popping up as well. Myself, I posted something that I read in one of the papers that I kind of overlooked in my presentation before. It was hygiene, because many authors were actually addressing hygiene factors. One of the reasons why people don't like to rent and share and lease, because many times you don't want to, this is perceived as something which is detrimental from this point of view. If you find the hygiene word in the intro talk, in fact, even if I didn't address it very much. But that one was the last of the warm-up exercises. Now I want to move you to another platform and to divide it in group, in fact. And I would like to launch a little bit more a practical exercise for you in order to reflect with your peers about how to design, in fact, for instance, a micromobility solution as a bike sharing system, considering also all these different keywords that we brought up to screen. What can we as designers do in order to make these systems being more effective? So what we're going to do now is to work with a platform which is Mural, and we are going to essentially do a little bit of a brainstorming session in small groups on the topic of shared micromobility. In general, shared micromobility is a strategy to meet residents' transportation needs in small, medium, and large towns. So these are solutions that many urban areas today are exploring, not last Karlskrona, in order to be able to reduce the number of cars in the city centers and to make the traffic experience more enjoyable by anybody. So what is micromobility? Essentially, shared micromobility, more in particular, is different types of solutions based on sharing micromobility devices or micromobility vehicles. For instance, this overboard is one of the different micromobility vehicles that you probably see also in your in your town. And these are typically zero emissions or low emission vehicles. It could be a bike, zero emission or low emissions like the overboard, and they are very, very popular for moving from point A to point B. And these shared solutions are also very highly customizable. I think it's very difficult to find the same solution be replicated in different cities. Many cities, their own small adjustments of these solutions, they are actually very customizable. We were discussing right now with Tobias during the break about different adjustments done in Karlskrona to prevent some problems that are typical of these solutions, in fact. And what I would like you to do is to think about how we shared micromobility solutions can be designed from the point of view of the designers in order to foster responsible consumptions and to serve the needs of people city-wise. So we are going to move into this environment, which is Mural. I'm going to show you very quickly on very soon on the share screen now. And you can access it both using your mobile, using this QR code, but probably it's much better if you work on your computer. So I will add this link to this environment in the chat if I can. Yeah, let's see, yes. So the idea here is to work in smaller groups, and I will, in fact, appreciate the help of the moderator of the virtual room to divide the groups in two randomly divided groups of people later on. And the idea is to reflect on how to intervene to design micromobility solutions, how to intentionally design them to foster responsible behaviors. And there are four major areas of aspect of interest: how to intentionally work as a designer with a business model, how to intentionally work with a customer user experience, how to intentionally design the hardware to foster responsible consumption, like the overboard or the bike, and how to customize the design process so we can bring in the topic of responsibility in a better way. So what happens when you access Mural? And I will do it right now, straight on. You will enter this environment, and I will be visiting Lobster. You will enter your mail, and you will enter as a visitor. And in fact, I have it open on my other browser, so we can see it. You will see what I see as well, very likely. Ctrl-T, Ctrl-V. Yeah. And you will see this screen. In fact, one will be for team number one, where I want you to reflect a little bit about tips for designers in order to improve and design responsible customer experiences, responsible business models or business models that foster responsibility, hardwares that are able to tame irresponsiveness, and design processes that do the same. So there will be one team number one, and one team will be team number two. And you can work with this platform simply by posting something through sticky notes. You can use the color coding that is suggested here, or you can use any type of color coding you agree upon. So you basically drag and drop your item, and you can write inside it. And this is the way it works. And you can, of course, export things, delete things, and I will delete this one. in this case. So we'll move for about 20 minutes in this environment. And can I ask Maria, the moderators, to create 2 rooms?
Yes. So should I put the regrouping after 20 minutes?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, just a second.
Thank you very much.
You should see the...
Yeah, it's starting in 4 seconds, so it will be in your group.
time was up, I guess.
Yeah, it was the quickest 20 minutes of my life.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was that quick. And yeah, now I have to get everybody back in a way or another. I should be able to do like I've done with you, clicking plus and getting you back.
I can click the regroup and everyone should be back. If you want me to.
Yeah, thanks, Rex. Please. Professor Kim, I see you back at least.
Oh yes, I don't know that. I remember I used this mural last time when we had a workshop at I said, but I don't remember anything about using it.
Okay.
So my teammates that did it wrote for me. So anyway,
How many were you? Two
we had
people.
a good discussion.
How many were you in your team? How many?
Anya?
I don't see people joining back.
Two of us.
Only two. We were four for some reason.
Yeah, I think. We have only 7, but 4 plus 2 is a 6. So.
Because I think
one is our
moderator to consider.
So that's how
I was hoping for 3 plus 3. Instead, we went the other way around. 4 plus 2. Interesting. I think we lost Daniela a little bit. I'm still waiting for 2 more to join the main session. I share. Yeah, I just it went very quick for our group. We were discussing several things, to be honest, and they just disappear like this, 20 minutes. Quite interesting, in fact. And but we managed to put some post-its on the board anyway, and even to create a totally new area that we call the ecosystem. And we are, I think I will give you a quick description of what you have done in a second. I'm just waiting if Gaetano and Daniela are joining us or not for in the plenary room.
Yeah, we know what?
Yeah,
we also find the ecosystem is the most important.
Okay.
So, but you set ecosystem as a new category, but we included it mostly on the business model part, because the business model design is actually one of the critical things in business model design is ecosystem design. Okay. So I think we had that common things between the two teams.
Yeah, it was Daniela's suggestion to talk about ecosystem because essentially this is reflecting the problem of designing things with a systemic view. So where you are not just looking at hardware services, but what it can happen if you have a system and other people can try to add their own things to this system. Daniela was mentioning about this secondary market of people collecting electrical scooters on different places and bring them back to the station, for instance, or to the charger. It was kind of a secondary market popping up. That is something that a designer should consider when designing solutions. But Professor Kim, do you want to share in 5 minutes what you discussed in your group, or more than a group? It was more like
Anya, could you brief for our team, please?
Yeah, sure. I can. Do you all hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Yeah. Marco, could you maybe switch to our, yeah.
You want to show, you want to see the customer experience, you want to see the hardware, and the business model.
I know, I understood that I should present our group stuff.
Yeah, please. I can share, otherwise you share the screen if you want.
Yeah, fine as well. Just a second.
Please stop sharing.
Yeah. So you can hopefully see my screen.
Yeah.
I'll just try to show you all of it at the same time. Just a second. Yeah, maybe like this. Yeah, we have, as Professor Kim already mentioned, we have also talked about the ecosystem, of course, and we said that it should be broader than it used to be when we focused only on the product itself. And we put it here right between the business model and the, oh, it says OS, it's the design process.
Yeah, I can fix that, no problem.
And also, we thought there should be a close connection to the customer or the user. Yeah, thank you so much. I think what was really important, so we started with the customer and user experience, and we identified reflection, as Professor Kim said before, as a very important factor, as well as the maybe not call it pressure, but peer pressure. And then again, availability, accessibility, quality and safety of the product. And then also a very important topic, I think, is data about how a product has been used, what kind of usage phases it has already gone through. Then costs would be on the board of customer or user experiences and the business model itself, which would be directing circularity, durability of a product, and I guess with various different business models, you can also achieve more control over a product. So if you offer leasing or sharing, you kind of always get the product back and have some more control over the product itself and reuse of product, but also if the product if the product has reached its end of life, then maybe about the components and in the end about the material. For the design process, one important thing, I guess, would be design for X, we call it. And we would say that X stands for reuse, remanufacturing, and other re or R strategies. A nice thing would be if collaboration would come before competition, I guess. So if there weren't 3 or 4 or 5 offers of, for example, e-scooters in one city, but if they collaborated more, and also closer connection with all the stakeholders from the network of value creation, also keeping up the value of a product service system would be nice. And in the last one, we said that the product itself, the hardware itself, should of course be sustainable. So choose the right material and stuff. Durable, it should be modular in order to be circular, and to enable data collection, we would also integrate sensors, for example. Yeah, that's what we.
Yeah, it's very populated. Thank you very much. It was a pretty good review. Thank you for choosing team 2 because we went for team 1 without. Yeah, but I can share you what we discussed instead, and if you want, you can complete. I try to regroup things in this way so you can see them a little bit better. So I think one of the most evident things we are doing was to talk about the ecosystem. Because there was a box that kind of we felt was missing, and the ecosystem, as said before, is because it's a pretty complex system, especially this one with eco-mobility, and new actors can pop up, new opportunities, no spin-offs, and even if they are not totally maybe legal, but we see many other stakeholders, in fact, that are influenced by that. If you look at, for instance, the design of the hardware, we were talking about login behaviors. for instance, through IoT. And we're also about the fact that the hardware can react to irresponsiveness, how you want to call it. So the hardware is able to detect misbehavior and to react immediately to it. For instance, the hardware can decrease the performances, can go slower if you ride it too hard. Or, for instance, the hardware can tell you, okay, you have not parked it correctly, and now the battery is too low, and you have to bring, the vehicle here in order to charge it, and you will get an incentive to do that. And everything has to do with essentially shortening the life of a product, but would actually require more material, more work, and it is in general not good for sustainability. We are talking a lot about, I don't remember who posted it, but modularity and robustness as well. And it's something that you touched upon a little bit too. We're looking at the PSS process, and Daniela reflected that most of the PSS, they take products from the shelves, and it's not that they are designed to do PSS. They cannot withstand the PSS most of the time. That is something that seems to be easy to spot, but many companies, they just do that. I posted that many times responsibility is difficult to treat as a requirement. And this is something that is challenging for designers that are used to work with requirements. We're looking at modularity as well in different markets. We were looking at cradle to grave circularity, and make it bigger as well. And we're looking at we need to expand system boundaries for account to potential unintended consequences. If you look on the top here, this was about the user experience. So there is an example from the town here where when you stop, for instance, your electrical scooter, you must take a picture of the scooter and send it to the provider of the service to show that the scooter is a good shape. And these features can be added, but they can be very detrimental to the customer experience. This is what I understood from you in the last few seconds, Gaetano. But it was done before, but now they took it away because probably for the customer experience is not good. It's good for being responsible, but this turns people away. Maybe they don't want that.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I was just confirming this, that it was kind of boring for the users, but it also could possibly contribute to a better preservation of the.
Yeah, no, it's very much. I totally agree, because the customer experience, if it's too low because of these add-ons, that makes people turn away from it, and you get less effect from your design. So it's kind of a vicious loop in a way. When we talk about simple use, easy access, and on the point of view of a business model, total cost of ownership was something that we discussed, maintenance and service ecosystem, vehicle as a service, and of course, the idea that to target different segments, and because people have different needs, different personas are using the service. I posted something on the penalties for irresponsible behavior, but there are also incentives. So it's a little bit to balance the two, probably. And there is also some discussion more into the ecosystem side on the municipality. I bring it forward. For instance, it's not just about the design of the hardware, it's the design of the infrastructure supporting it, the co-development of infrastructure, service, and products, and so on. And it was a short workshop, but it was done in this way because we are not too many participants. Of course, if we had 4 or 5 groups, it would have taken more time. But I see that we got to the end of the session right now, and more or less just in time, I would say. I just wonder if you have something that we should discuss in the last 1 minute or two, if you have any reflection. Otherwise, please.
I would like to pose a question whether the penalty strategy is sustainable enough.
Sorry?
Okay, by charging some fines if you don't do right.
Yeah.
And even from the business model point of view, is that going to be sustainable enough to kind of induce a sustainable behavior?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, this one, the posted here, should be attached to this one. I mean, it's totally detrimental for a customer experience, and it can create a loop by which you don't want to use it just because you have a fear that you will get a penalty. And that's totally correct. That's probably the reason why I never get a rental car, because I'm so scared to get it crashed. I have to pay for it. And that's a sad story, but it's true. I'm very skeptical about rental cars. Too many bad things on this green square for me. But I totally agree. It's a balance here, and it's very much influencing also the customer experience. I will put it actually here on a little bit between the two.
Actually, I have one question about this kind of a partitioning.
Yeah.
I mean, the view of a business model, actually business model should include the customer experience. Business model should include the hardware issues. Business model should include the design processes when you are designing business models. So I don't know whether this business model is something kind of a separate.
Probably something that incorporates a little bit everything, but is more oriented towards business issue. Let's say that this is more like a trigger, business issue
okay.
more than business model. I think it's better to
or
name it
economics issue, right? Than business model.
Yeah, because business model contains a little bit of everything what we discussed, but these are business related issues in a way.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. It was a fun workshop. Congratulate to all of us.
Yeah, thank you for participating, and we look at the other workshops around. I have to say that the degree of participation was kind of similar for most of them. We are doing a little bit of benchmarking, 10, 15 participants. We got 11 at the maximum today. So we are not very far from target. But, what I will do is that I will share this presentation and everything, and I will also make a small video to recap what we discussed. So it's better than listen to 3 hours meeting. So I will make that available too on the PSS SIG page, special interest group page. Thank you very much for today, and I need to go to pick up my little kid now. That's the reason why I'm leaving you, mostly. And see you around at Design 2022, in some other sessions and some other occasions. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Great work.